Welcome to this Making Children's Rights Real, the UNC, GERFEC and the Promise event. This is the second in a series of events which we're putting on as a collaborative effort between GCVS, the Alliance, Children in Scotland, the Children's Parliament, Together Scotland, and the Scottish Child Law Centre. And we're hoping there will be at least 2 more events in this series after that. Today we're going to focus on children's rights and the promise, and in particular around children's voice and involving children and young people and in co-production and co-design. You've all have seen the agenda and the great array of workshops that we have available. So I think it's really going to be an incredibly interesting afternoon. We are recording the first part of the session with the keynote speakers, but because there are so many workshops, we've decided not to try and record them, but instead what we will be doing after the event is producing a blog on our website with any presentations, video clip, comments about what's gone on, so that you can follow up things afterwards. We're welcoming people this afternoon from right across Scotland, from both public and third sector, so I think it will make some really interesting debates. In terms of Zoom etiquette, I would ask you for the main session to keep yourselves on mute to reduce any background noise. Obviously, in your workshops, we're hoping that they will be fairly participative, and we would be, encourage you to talk in the workshops at appropriate times. We're going to work hard to stick closely to our timescales here. So I'm going to hand over any second now to our keynote speakers, who I'm really delighted that they said yes, with Beth Ann Logan and Dylan Duff, who've been living and breathing children's rights and the promise. So without any further ado, I'm going to do that handover and ask Beth and Dylan to give their presentation.
Thank you, Susie. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Beth Ann Logan, and I'm a Promise Development Worker at North Lanarkshire Council. Excuse me. I suppose in my roles over the past kind of 8 years within this childcare sector, I've worn many hats. I am Scotland's youngest non-executive director, appointed at that time when I was 19. And I sit on the board of Children's Seed in Scotland, which is the national body that recruits, trains and supports our children's panel members to make sure that our children are safe and protected on a welfare basis, and on that co-branding kind of ethos of needs not deeds. I was also a co-chair at the Independent Care Review. I co-chaired a work strand called The Best Place in the World. That's where we kind of started. Initially, our remit was to look at overseas and look at practice that was happening overseas, and very quickly we realised that it's not as simple as picking something up, but taking it over and dropping it into Scottish context. Sometimes the landscape is different, the political will is different, the fact that we've got 32 local authorities is different. So we asked the chair of the review, if we could change our remit and start to look at what do we need to build childhoods for our children. So what do they need to grow up safe? What do they need to grow up to make sure that their rights are protected? And we don't hear the narrative that, oh, with rights come responsibilities, that children have rights regardless of that. We also spoke about kind of how we could make sure that children have all that they need to thrive, and things that they're entitled to. Every child is entitled to a childhood, and it's about how we support our families to make sure that we give them that. I also do some consultancy work for the Children and Young People Centre for Justice, or CYCJ as it's known as. I do some of that. I also helped create CHS's Children's Rights and Inclusion Strategy back in 2019-20, right in the height of the pandemic. We started it, and I suppose that was a really good opportunity to showcase some co-production work. So what we did there was we had a group of people with lived experience who then began to shape and influence the strategy. So they attended every single meeting with our multi-agency partners, but at the end of it, we also had a specific session just for those with lived experience, so that they could feed in their views into the overall strategy, the content of it, how it looked, how it felt, things that they weren't comfortable with, things that they think they could go further with. So I think that's one of the proudest achievements of kind of having been able to influence that strategy, and for those young people to feed in and to feel proud of the work that they've achieved. And also, when we were at the independent care review, we spoke to the full review team, spoke to over 5,500 people, half of which had lived experience of care, and the other half were the paid and unpaid workforce. And I think that that's a phenomenal phenomenal experience to have been able to experience the voices reports and directly hear from those with lived experience as to what needs to change. In my role as a promise development worker, I have we have various roles, and Dylan will tell you a bit more about his role as well. But we essentially are on a policy level. We influence policies and procedures, and we make sure that they're friendly, that they're accessible, but most importantly that they've got the child at the centre of that. But equally, as well as influencing policy, we get to do participation. So I'm currently working with an approach called Contextual Safeguarding, and what that looks at is it looks at the places and spaces where children and young people are it looks at what we call extra familial harm. So that's harm outside the family homes. That looks at peer on peer kind of pressure or abuse. It looks at exploitation, whether that be criminal, sexual, drug orientated, things like that. And what that approach is doing for North Lanarkshire is it's been able to give us a foundation to build our services upon. So what do our young people need? And I've been really fortunate enough that I've got to go around North Lanarkshire and meet loads of amazing, inspirational young people who are so desperate to have their voice heard, just haven't been given the opportunity before. I mean, yeah, sometimes when you go in and you ask, what do you think? They kind of look at you with a bit of a blank stare, and they're like, what do you mean, what do I think? And that's to show, that kind of just shows the level that we're at when we're talking about kind of participation, co-production, and making sure children know their rights. So usually in any work that I do, I work off Laura Lundy's model of participation, and that focuses on Article 12 of the UNCRC, and that looks at the right to have your voice heard and given due weight. And that kind of model, the Laura Lundy model, looks at kind of space, audience, influence, and I've forgotten the last one. I can't remember. It'll come back to me. So we are a local authority that are kind of striving to ensure that rights are right at the centre of everything that we do, because we know that we, as a case experienced person myself, as someone who's experienced every aspect of care since birth, I understand what it feels like to have your voice silenced, and that's why I've dedicated the last kind of 6 years to making sure that no other young person ever has to feel the way that I was made to feel, to make sure that they're given every opportunity, they're given the opportunity to influence things, not just in their life, but how services look and feel and how they wrap around people for that as well. So I'm going to pause there and bring in Dylan, and Dylan's going to kind of talk a bit about himself and stuff like that as well, and then we'll kind of come together and we'll round the final keynote speech off. But I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Dylan Duff.
Thank you very much, Beth. A hard act to follow as always. So like Beth, I'm also a promise development worker in Northland, and on the side of that, I also work at Scottish Action Action as I forgot my actual role. With engagement participation lead as well, so looking at how young people get involved in what we do and how we do it. And I think that the way I got involved in the promise stuff initially was helping the campaign a wee bit. And I remember meeting Fiona Duncan back in the day in 2017 at her office in Edinburgh, and she was asking a range of different questions. And one of the questions she asked me, which really sat with me, was that what does love feel like to you? You know, and I didn't really know the answer to that, because I didn't really feel like I felt love in the system. Not a lot of people in the system feel love, and actually we kind of teased that out a little bit. So then went on and worked in a components of care work group, which looked at mapping a day, a week, a month, a year in the life of someone with experience and what that looks like and feels like for them in every single move and transition. And quite often it was about the policies and practices in the background. So why were practitioners not living? It wasn't I didn't want it. It's that they were scared of getting investigated by SSC, for example, or that the policies and processes weren't there in the background to support that, enable that to happen. And so we really spent a lot of time in that work group making recommendations about changing how we work and where we have our young people, because we will never get to co-production, we'll never get to a space where they're at. If we work from a space where we're at all the time, we need to come to their level and bring them alongside us and to do that as well. So that's something that I've taken with me into this role, and North Lanarkshire as well. And we're really focused in North Lanarkshire about this tokenistic production doesn't work, you know, or what does that look like? Does that look all right? Well, no, why don't we just involve people at the start of any piece of work we do? So it's about making sure they're at the same level, so they have the information to make informed choices and the information to know exactly what we're talking about, so everyone's on the same page. And then we look at a plan moving forward, because if they've not got all the information, then we hold all the cards and they won't know what they don't know. So rather than assuming everyone knows, we spend a lot of time focusing on making sure everyone's on the same page, and then we look at next steps moving forward. And we've been really working hard to adapt what we do and change things like making sure brothers and sisters stay together. So we look at policies and procedures in relation to some of that. If I was to look at it now and look at the promise, my overall hope for the promise is that young people know what it's like to feel up, you know, grow up feeling loved. They'll know what that feels like. And practitioners, so young people, will work together, and there won't be any barriers to that. And all the policies and procedures would be amplifying of that and supporting that, so that young people can grow up in the best place in the world. Beth, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you. And I suppose what I wanted to highlight as well is one of the 5 foundations that influenced the promise was voice. And we can never underestimate the power of voice and the power of lived experience, because too often, as I had said earlier, young people are silenced. We've now entered a different era. We have loads of groups, we have loads of initiatives, we have loads of people really working really hard across the sector, and that includes everybody in this room, all 132 participants. We know how hard you're working to make sure that that voice is something that's evident across the work that all you do. We know how hard you're working to make sure that it fits into the foundation of care, the foundation of family, that whole family support approach. We know what it looks like in people and scaffolding as well. And sometimes it can be a bit daunting when you think you're working really, really hard in the day job to ensure that things get done, like, and your workload gets completed. And sometimes it can be difficult to manage your workload with including voice and making sure voice is front and centre. But I suppose the one thing that I would hammer home is somebody who had experience of secure care, for example, oftentimes I was told what was happening, and I didn't get a say in that. And I didn't really understand at the time why I couldn't have a say in it. But we've moved into a different era now, where we have things like in our secure care centres, we have pupil councils, we have kind of promise champions. We undergone a massive participation and engagement process back in 2018 around the publication of the Secure Care National Standards. And I think that all of that work nationally, locally, it doesn't matter whether it's national or whether it's local. What matters is that child's voice is being heard, it's being listened to, it's being respected, and most importantly, it's being acted upon. And I think that, just to finally close, I'd like to share a quote with you that our John Carnican, my friend John Carnican, shared at the Journey group just before we completed the conclusions of the review. And what he said is, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever can. And I think that that's true for all of us. We have a responsibility in Scotland to make sure that we do make Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. We have a responsibility in Scotland to make sure that we protect our families, that we nurture our children, that we show them that they're loved, as Dylan says, we show them that they matter, and we show them that we're committed to making sure that their rights are realised. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and absolutely bang on the button timing-wise as well. And I think both you and Dylan have both illustrated beautifully why we should be listening to young people with lived experience who've been through the system. So thank you for that very much. And I know you're both working really hard this session and taking part in one of the workshops as well. So you know, many of the participants are going to hear more from you today as well, but that was a really great and really moving start to the session this afternoon. Okay, we're now going to move into workshops. Many of you have expressed an interest in which workshops that you want to attend, and if you haven't expressed an interest, we've randomly assigned you to a workshop. I think they'll all be absolutely brilliant workshops this afternoon. We've got 35 minutes and then a comfort break, and then another keynote speaker with Suki Wan this afternoon. Then we're repeating the workshops before finishing off this afternoon with a play from Lickety Spit. And if you haven't done so already, you might like, during the comfort break, to find some handy things for a spot of dressing up as part of that session. So as I say, just a little forward warning there. So have a look for some things to dress up in when we get to that session. Okay, Christina, are we ready for the magic